All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Shadows Podcast, our Rebound series. And this is an absolute stacked lineup of guests that we had so far. You've seen or heard Joanne P. McCauley from Duke. You've heard Ricky Price from Duke, Coach Matt Doherty, previously at North Carolina, and then Thurl Bailey from NC State. And then what a main event we have here, Mark Price. And just saying that name alone and not having to read off the accolades says enough. But here, Georgia Tech, he was the 1983 ACC Rookie of the Year, 1985 Player of the Year in the ACC Tournament MVP, where they beat my Tar Heels. Three-time All-American, 12 seasons in the NBA, first-team All-NBA, two-time three-point contest champ, four-time NBA All-Star. His numbers retired by the Cavs, by Georgia Tech. He was a member of Dream Team 2, and also he has the Mark Price for Three podcast with good friend of mine, Aaron Conrad, where they discuss the game of basketball and faith in Jesus Christ. Sir, welcome to the Shadows.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, man. Glad to be here.
Well, first thing I want to do is start off with a couple of rapid fires for you.
Okay.
Book recommendation for listeners out there.
Book recommendation. Man, that one caught me off guard here a little bit. I got a lot of them that I like, but Utmost for His Highest is just Oswald Chambers devotional type thing. It's great. I enjoy that. I think people don't want to do long readings, but short readings that really encourage and I mean just so many guys. John Gordon, obviously, I love him. All his books and things like that. So those would be some I would suggest.
Okay, and we'll stay with the book tone. What is a certain scripture that you find yourself referring back to on a daily basis?
I just think one of my life verses has just been, whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus. And so, whether you're having a good day, having a bad day, whatever it might be, that verse just applies. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's whatever you do, whatever you're doing that particular day, do all of it in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and do your best to honor and glorify him.
All right. Next one. Loudest arena you've ever played in?
Loudest arena, man. College, probably Duke, just because they're right on top of you there. Small arena, it gets really loud. At the NBA level, there were so many great ones, but probably old Chicago Stadium when we were playing the Bulls in the playoffs, and it got pretty loud in that place.
I'm sure you wish Chicago just would not have been in the Eastern Conference for about a 5-6 year span there.
Well, we were never able to get past them, but I tell people all the time, I guess I might have a little bit different perspective, but I mean, those are some of my best memories, those series. I mean,
Classic.
Even though they beat us in the end, I mean, we were back and forth. Those were battles, and playing against one of the greatest players, if not the greatest, to one of the greatest teams, and just getting to have that experience and be a part of that. Yeah. It was amazing. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
People still talk about the 89 game, the Craig Elo shot.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that was the up and down of that game. I mean, what a lot of people don't realize is that we were down one with 6 seconds to go. Mm-hmm. And Elo scores a layup with only took us 3 seconds, which was 3 seconds too much time for Chicago.
Much for Jordan.
Yeah. So, but the ups and downs and the highs and lows of that game were just unbelievable. I mean, from, Elo hitting that shot, I mean, talk about loud. I mean, our arena was just going nuts. And then when Jordan hits that shot, it's like total silence. It was it was devastating. Everybody in the building. So,
okay. Well, the next question, this is kind of a fun question. The 85 Georgia Tech team versus Lethal Weapon 3, 1990. Who wins that game?
Boy, I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, I'm biased because of my team. I would probably say we would, because
y'all were a little bit deeper.
We were deeper, and we could have punished them inside. We had 2 7-footers and just played a different style of game. But offensively, that Lethal Weapon team might have been, with those 3 guys, might have been the best offensive team that Georgia Tech's ever put on the court. And those guys just put up numbers, and that would have been that would have been some kind of game. I think
Yeah.
Kenny Anderson and myself, we might have, wiped each other out in that. Bruce Dalrymple and Brian Oliver probably would have taken. So I think a lot of it would come down to the Dennis Scott matchup in that. We had, Dwayne Farrell as well on our team. So, it was close, but I think our advantage would have been inside, our guys inside.
Malcolm Mackey, was he a freshman?
Malcolm Mackey was playing on that Lethal Weapon team, and good player as well.
Yeah.
But just like you said, the depth and the size might have been our advantage. But man, those guys were good.
We were at the ACC tournament in 1990, and
yeah,
we stayed. North Carolina got eliminated first round. I don't know why my parents stayed, but we stayed for the whole tournament. And I remember watching that Georgia Tech Virginia game, and the day of, I rode down the elevator with Coach Crimmins.
Oh yeah,
and thought it was the coolest thing in the world. All right, and the last question here: dinner for three with three historical figures who are no longer with us. Who do you break bread with?
Whew. Well, one would be Jesus, no doubt.
Yep. He's been invited to every one.
Billy Graham, who I did get to meet. Actually, he did a revival in Cleveland while I was playing there, and I got to share my testimony on the stage with him. So I actually got to meet Billy Graham, which was really, really cool.
How cool is that? Jeez.
Yeah, for sure. And then, number three, there's just so many guys out there, but man, that third one would be tough, but probably the Apostle Paul.
Okay.
He'd be an interesting dude to talk to.
You've got to get on Aaron. Did you hear Aaron's answer? His was Jesus, Mom, and Freddie Mercury. And
Freddie Mercury.
He said that's going to be the name of his next book. So make sure you shoot him a text about that one.
All right, I will.
Well, you survived our rapid fire. And now to get into your story, and you got a really interesting story because sports and life often imitate each other. They're full of highs and lows, heartaches, success. So talk to us about your upbringings in Oklahoma. You were the son of a coach, correct?
I was. Grew up in Oklahoma most of my life. My dad being a coach, we've never lived anywhere longer than 4 years in our lives. So, about every 4 years, even today, I start getting an itch. Like, is it time to move somewhere and go somewhere different? So I can relate to like military families, the kids talk about moving around all the time because coaching, there's a lot of similarities there. But my dad was a coach, and I fell in love with the game of basketball at an early age. Had two younger brothers. Brent, my youngest brother, played in the NBA as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, those Price family pickup games were they got no intense. Blood, no foul. I mean, it got to be pretty intense at times. And so, just grew up around loving it. The problem was I was never very big. I was, even in high school, coming out of high school, I was 5'11", 155 pounds. But my dad's pet peeve growing up was shooting. And so I was kind of like his guinea pig, It was like, even when I was shooting good, he'd come in and he'd go, hey, why don't you try this? And why don't you try that? And so, but it worked out. It worked out good because obviously my shooting is what allowed me to kind of play at every level and be successful. And I remember I wasn't being highly recruited. Matter of fact, going into my senior year, I didn't have any offers, and I went and played. And AAU back at that time was just kind of getting started. Hadn't even heard of it. Had a guy that owned a fried chicken franchise in Oklahoma City. Called me up one day, and this was after my junior year, and he goes, I'm putting together the best players in the state. And our particular class in Oklahoma was really good. We had guys like Wayman Tisdale and Steve Hale that played at North Carolina, and Sam Bowie, not Sam Bowie, but Anthony Bowie that eventually played in the NBA as well. And so we had a really good group of guys. And so he takes us down to Jacksonville, Florida. He said, hey, there's going to be college coaches there. This is a new thing. They're starting up kind of this AAU stuff. And so we go down there, and it was literally kind of the best players, because it isn't like it is now when there's like 40 or 50 teams per state.
Right.
I mean, there was literally like one or two teams per state. And so you literally had the best players from every state that showed up down there. And we got to the championship game of that tournament and played New York City, who had Chris Mullen and a bunch of those kind of guys on their team. And so that's really was kind of my coming out party. And people start taking notice. And a guy named George Felton, who was assistant coach at Georgia Tech, gave me a call. And at the time, I'd never heard of Georgia Tech. I heard of the ACC, and I heard all the,
It just joined.
Yeah, because Georgia Tech had just gotten into the ACC a couple years before I went there. And so, but those guys just recruited me so hard, and they were looking for guys flying under the radar because the program was so bad at that time, Georgia Tech. I mean, I think they had won 2 ACC games in 2 years, something like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were saying that they could never win in the ACC. And so they wanted to start their program with a point guard and a big man. And so they kind of focused in on me at the point guard position. And then a guy named John Sally out of New York City, who was kind of under the radar as well. He was 6'9" at the time, but only about 185 pounds. And so they bring us 2 in, along with a couple other guys our freshman year at Georgia Tech. And then we just kept adding pieces. Yeah. Bruce Dalrymple the next year, Craig Neal, Yvonne Joseph. And then the next year we added Dwayne Farrell, and it just kept building. And my freshman year, I won ACC Rookie of the Year. And I think Georgia Tech, after that, I was the first one. I think it was like 5 or 6 straight years.
Yeah, every year, Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, we had Rookie of the Year. And so that was the kind of talent that Georgia Tech started to bring in. And we went from worst my freshman year at Georgia Tech to winning the ACC championship by my junior year. And it was pretty unheard of and amazing that could be accomplished, because, I mean, when people think of the ACC now, obviously it's a good conference, but back in the early 80s, I mean, the ACC was the conference. I mean, I think there was every year we probably had about 5 or 6 teams that were in the top 20. It was ridiculously talented. And so for us to be able to go from last place to first place in 2 years in that conference was really, it's an accomplishment that I don't think gets enough credit that people look at it, because, I mean, the difficulty of that with how good the teams were was something special. And so having to beat North Carolina even for a 3rd time in one season, I don't think a lot of people gave us a lot of chance to do that. And so that was an extremely special moment for me in my career, that accomplishment of winning that first ACC championship at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, so many things you said there to unpack. First, the moving piece. I can relate. We're about to move to California in August, and we've gotten to that 4-year mark, and we're like, okay, we got to start packing stuff up. And how AAU has changed since then.
Yeah,
probably not a lot of fried chicken managers running AAU teams anymore.
No.
Did you ever consider staying in state, or Oklahoma State?
Well, I did. I was recruited by all the Oklahoma schools. My parents both went to OU. Mm-hmm. And my dad played basketball at OU and baseball at OU, and he also coached as assistant coach at OU during while I was growing up. And so, I think a lot of people just kind of assumed I would go to OU and play with Wayman Tisdale.
Is that Billy Tubbs?
Yeah, Billy Tubbs was the coach there. But for some reason, I didn't feel like they had. I don't know. Billy Tubbs never really came to watch me play. His assistants recruited me. I don't know if they took it for granted, but I got a sense that I just wanted to go where I felt like I was wanted and needed. Right. And I didn't get that sense from OU in the way they recruited me. And they put most of their eggs in Wayman's basket. I mean, he was the number 1 player in the country at the time. I was just a guy that a lot of people thought was just going to be okay at best at the college level. People thought I was small and overlooked. Matter of fact, North Carolina came in and watched me practice. They didn't watch me play in a game, which was a big mistake, because I was much better in the games than I was in practice. But they basically told me I was too small, and they went down the road and signed Steve Hale, another Oklahoma kid. But
you lit up Steve Hale, didn't you?
Well, what's funny, a funny story is, and I could not be totally right, but I'm pretty sure the day he signed with North Carolina was the day we played his team in the state semifinals in Oklahoma. And I believe a lot of the staff from North Carolina was there for him to sign or whatever. And I scored 42 points and we beat them that game.
They're like, this is the next 4 years, right?
Yeah, yeah. But Steve he was a great player coming out of high school. I mean, I could see why so many people wanted him. He was 6'4", he could score. But, at North Carolina, it seemed like they kind of turned him into a defensive specialist and kind of the system that they played there. So whenever I would run into Steve, I always used to say, I thanked him for taking that North Carolina scholarship because it ended up working out better for me because I got to shoot at Georgia Tech.
Well, even Kenny Anderson was being recruited hard by North Carolina. I don't think he would have fit in with North Carolina at all.
Well, Kenny Anderson, we're pretty, all the kind of point guards that have come through Georgia Tech. We talk to Kenny all the time, says, hey, the reason I came to Georgia Tech was because of you. And I saw the way that Coach Crimmins let you play and gave you the freedom and that was one thing that was really enticing to all the top point guards kind of as we start continuing that down that road.
Two-part question for you about Coach Crimmins. First impressions of him, and then what is something you find yourself doing, especially at your camps, that you're like, oh my gosh, that's him speaking right there?
Well, I don't think I'd ever met anybody from New York. I'd grown up in Oklahoma and, kind of country kid or whatever. And he shows up at our house for an in-home visit and literally talked, I think, for 2 straight hours. And we were just memorizing. I don't think we got a word in. It was just, and we had to decipher some of the words he was saying because, he had that New York accent. And, I tell people all the time, by the time I left Georgia Tech, I thought my name was Mock, not Mark. And because mock this, mock that. And, but yeah, he just had there was just this enthusiasm that was infectious with him. And, it was a God thing because that was where I was supposed to go. But everybody looking in from the outside was like, man, that's a really stupid move to go to Georgia Tech so far away from home and playing in a conference that you're never going to win and all this. But it was just, there was something about Coach Crimmins that I believed, hey, if he could pull me out of Oklahoma, that he was going to go get some other players for me to play with. And that's exactly what happened. And, Bobby was a very strong Catholic background. And so there was a lot of things that we bumped heads with over the years, but it was a mutual respect for each other and our love for what we were trying to accomplish together that we're still just super, super close. I mean, we talk often and, it's just, we were the start of that whole thing. And that's just something that no one else could ever have.
Yeah.
And so that bond that we have is special. And it was just, I love the guy to death and I love playing for him.
What's the one thing you find yourself saying or doing when you're at your basketball camps that you're like, that's Coach Crimmins?
Well, I just think, I'm sure it's different sayings or things that he might have said over the years might come out and slip out. I mean, our personalities are totally different. And so I, probably don't do a lot of things the same way he would, but, and the other thing too, is he was a defensive guy in his background. And so I was like, I never let him mess with my shot because I was like, that's my dad taught me how to do that. I think I'm going to listen to him coach on that. But no, just so much of just the way he cared about, the thing about Bobby was he really cared about people. He really cared about his players.
Yeah.
And even though, I mean, he probably is tough on me and probably rode me harder than anybody else. Mainly because I was his best player. I'm sure it was like, well, if I can do that with Mark, then the other players or whatever. But all through that though, anytime, and we had many times where we, bumped heads and just it's, relationships and how that goes and seeing each other and being around each other all the time. But through all of it, there was one thing that was never questioned, was that I knew that he had my back.
Yeah.
Like he might get on me and he might ride me, but if he was talking to anybody else, I mean, I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. It was just like, I just knew, like, he had my back and I had his, and we were going to do this thing together.
Yeah, I saw a quote before. I think it was the '86 tournament, but he was like, "I don't even want to think of Georgia Tech without Mark Price." Maybe the one thing you'll find yourself doing now is you'll bust out a New York accent every now and then. That's
Well, I tell people all the time. I use it, when he's pointing at the players, he goes, "And I'm talking to yous, and I'm talking to yous, and I'm talking to yous." And no, he was a character. Couldn't spell. I to this day, he had a South Carolina diploma in his office.
Yeah.
I still to this day don't believe he ever got a diploma. I mean, because the guy can't spell. He can't. I mean, he misspelled writing on the chalkboard so many times where we just start laughing. It was just, the guy was just, he was so unique, and yet he was just so real. I mean, there's been stories of, I mean, because even, when he got into the league, you have these legendary Dean Smith and Terry Holland
Valvano.
and I mean, you just had all these legendary ACC coaches that were, all this first class. And the story was they, would have these coaches meetings, ACC coaches meetings, and they would all play golf and stuff together. And the story is, he's playing with Dean Smith and Terry Holland one round, and Dean's like over there about to putt the ball, and Bobby's on the other side of the hole going, listen. I mean,
I'm sure set well with Dean Smith.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, at first I'm sure they were like, who is this guy? He didn't understand etiquette and all the other stuff, but yet at the end of the day, everybody loved him because he was just real. There was something about him. He wasn't trying to pretend to be something that he wasn't. And yet he just had this competitive side to him, though, that just, he wanted to win so bad. And so winning that ACC championship, because I'm not sure if you know the story of his South Carolina teams when he played, they were really good, and they lost. Yeah, they lost in the ACC championship game, and that devastated Bobby for years. And so when we were able to finally win that ACC championship, we wanted it as much for Coach as we did for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that was 1970 ACC championship. Yeah. And then South Carolina, I think, left the SEC shortly after that. He's my favorite Gamecock. I will definitely say that. But you get to Georgia Tech 83, 13 and 15. I think your Georgia Tech story is really good for listeners out there, because you get there and people forget that's the year the ACC experimented with a 30-second clock, thanks in part to the four corners, and you had a 3-point line. And you love that 3-point line your freshman year, to where teams started to guard you from behind to make you take twos instead of threes. You get ACC Rookie of the Year. But what do you remember about that freshman year in terms of the record's not exactly what we want, or did you still, really believe in what Coach Crimmins was putting in place?
Well, I mean, it was crazy. I mean, people were so excited that we had won 13 games. Like, I mean, the Tech program was so bad, and I can't remember how many. Maybe we won 3 or 4, maybe 4 ACC games our freshman year. But we were starting 4 freshmen. Yeah. I mean, in the ACC, I mean, think about that. I mean, we played North Carolina that year, and we gave them a decent game on the road at their place, and they had Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins, Brad Daugherty. I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, it was just ridiculous, the kind of competition. And, it really helped me because I had the freedom, because they had the 3-point line, which helped me a lot that year. I led the league in scoring because of it. But because we were just Bobby was trying to kind of figure things out. We had this young team. I had the freedom. And so, my confidence I left that freshman season thinking, all right, guys, we can get this done. I mean, I felt like I belonged, you know what I mean? Like going in, it's like there were so many doubters. Is he big enough? Is he an ACC caliber player? And I think I put all that to rest that freshman year to where, I mean, I made second team all ACC
Mm-hmm.
as a freshman, and
In a
so
stacked ACC.
yeah, and a stacked ACC. So like all of a sudden I was like, okay, now let's just, and we knew Bobby was bringing in, some good recruits for the next
Yep.
year. And so, we made a big jump and winning 18 games our second year. And even though we fell, probably had we won one game in the ACC tournament, we probably would have made the NCAA that year. But
Y'all
we
lost to
did.
Duke in overtime, I think. It was really
Yeah.
close.
Yeah. We lost to Duke. And so we ended up playing the NIT, but that was still post game experience for us, which led on to all of a sudden now we jump up and we're winning 27, 28 games my last 2 years.
Yeah. 84 was a big year because y'all went from 13 and 15 to 18 and 11. You won 6 ACC games. Y'all were actually ranked during that year. And then I think what people, even like Georgia Tech fans, tend to probably overlook that year, y'all beat NC State in the ACC, which is 1 year off of a national championship. You beat Wake Forest that year, which was really good. Had a good NCAA tournament run. Duke, which was up and coming too.
Yeah.
Maryland with Lim Bias. Y'all beat them, and then y'all beat a Final Four Virginia team. Y'all beat some really good teams that year. And you mentioned you lose to Virginia Tech and the NIT, but all the pieces are getting in place to where that 85 team, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated teams in the history of the ACC. I mean, 27 and 8, 9 and 5 in the ACC. You hit a game winning shot in the Rainbow Classic that year.
Yeah.
Back when the Rainbow Classic, was a huge tournament.
Yeah.
Y'all won the regular season ACC, and I'm sure for Coach Crimmins, like you said, winning the ACC tournament, number 6 in the final poll. You're the ACC Player of the Year, and y'all beat 13 ranked teams that year. I mean, absolutely stacked. Y'all are the first team to beat Carolina 3 times with Dean Smith in a season since the 1974 NC State team. But for this one here, it was kind of interesting. Do you remember the drawing y'all had to do for the ACC tournament with North Carolina and NC State for the number 1 seed?
Is that in 85?
Yeah, there was a drawing y'all had to have to see who got the number 1 seed in the tournament.
Now that you mention it, I do remember. I mean, I hadn't thought about that in years, but I do remember that. Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. Y'all go to the Omni. How was it playing in the Omni versus the Thriller Dome?
Well, we played a lot of games early on, all our big games. We played Carolina in the Omni every year. We played Georgia, our rivalry game, in the Omni every year. And we kind of had a tournament every year that we would play in the Omni. So we played 4 or 5 games every year in the Omni. So when we knew the tournament was coming there, that was a big boost for us as well. And to know that Atlanta at that time, Atlanta was getting seriously into Georgia Tech basketball. And so to have the tournament, which normally for years had been in Greensboro, to have it in Atlanta was huge for us that year.
Yeah. That's probably funny to hear Tobacco Road fans like, come on, it's in their backyard after it had been in Greensboro for 30 years. But y'all end up going to the ACC championship game, and you trailed until 52 seconds left. And then y'all end up beating North Carolina. And you mentioned how important that was to Coach Crimmins. But I think this is a really cool part of your story was during that year, you'll get into the NCAA tournament. You play Mercer, Syracuse, Illinois, and then you play Georgetown in a game that, I mean, all the pieces were falling in place for you. Patrick Ewing's in foul trouble. I think they had 3 or 4 players that were in foul trouble late in the game, and y'all were up. And y'all ended up losing 60-54. But what's really important is accountability, falling on the sword. For any of our listeners, especially in the military, we really preach that. And your quote after the game was, "I'm the one responsible. I let my team down." And I had Shaman Williams on the podcast too, and he went from being ACC tournament MVP, and then they got in the Final Four, and I think it was something like 0 for 12 or 0 for 13, and he took accountability for that too. How important was that for you, especially at that young of an age, to say something so mature, just to fall on the sword and be like, "Look, this was on me. I didn't hold up my end."
Well, it was just it was so disappointing. Obviously, I mean, going back to that, we really felt like we were a team capable of winning the whole thing. I mean, we were that good. I really believe that. And we felt like the NCAA did a terrible job. I mean, because you had the ACC and the Big East were the two best conferences in the country. And so we win the ACC and Georgetown wins the Big East, and they put us in the same bracket against each other, which to me was not right. You know, I'm still a little bitter about that. I'll be honest with you.
North Carolina, I think, would have got a number one seed.
Yeah, that's. I mean, honestly, if we're in a different bracket, we're probably playing Georgetown for the national championship game. But that being said, we got matched up, and yeah, it was one of my worst games of my college career from a shooting standpoint. I was like 3 for 16, and I'd just come off a game against Illinois where I was like 9 for 11. And so we were playing with such confidence, and it was just one of those games. And I mean, give Georgetown credit. They're big and they're long and they're a good defensive team. But they opened the game in a zone defense. I mean, and I'm thinking, okay, man, what are they doing? And I just, the shots all felt good. They were hitting front rim. It was just one of those deals they wouldn't go in. But yeah, of course, for us to win, as good as we were, I had to score. That was just kind of the way our team was set up. And so, yeah, I felt like it was my fault. And I didn't, in the disappointment of it all, I wasn't afraid to say, hey, look, man, I'm sorry. That's on me, and it's a terrible, terrible feeling when you're one game away from the Final Four. And so, to come back the next year and bounce back and still be as good as we were and, have a good year.
You added Hammonds that year too, didn't you?
Yeah. But that 85 team, as good as we probably were more talented, my 86 with Hammonds and everything, but the chemistry on that 85 team was special. And I think that was probably our best team while I was there.
And we mentioned at the top of this, Coach Crimmins in 4 years went from 4-23 winless in the ACC, and 4 years later, and I'm, folks, it's not today's ACC, and nothing against today's ACC, but this was absolutely stacked. This was the glory days. 27-8 in 1985. Started the 86 season number one. Ultimately lost to LSU in the Omni, which was crazy. And we talked to Dale Brown last season on the podcast, but this question comes from my daughter. She actually had a couple of her and my wife had these next to about your Georgia Tech experience. How were you able to balance the student athlete experience during your 4 years at Georgia Tech?
Yeah, I think it, I like I said, I'd grown up in Oklahoma. And so like going to Atlanta, Georgia from Oklahoma, and what people have to realize is, no cell phones. I'm showing my age now. We had no cell phones, no internet, no social media. Literally, I got one phone call a week to call home. I had to go up to coach's office and he let me call my parents. It was like one time a week. I mean, it was like I moved to a different, country. Basically.
It's called basic training for us.
Yeah. And so in some ways, I look back on that as a blessing because we didn't have as many distractions. I mean, I don't know how hard it would have been to focus on all the things I needed to focus on if I'd have had all the distractions of internet, cell phones, all the things that I think are just super, super, I don't want to get on a rant here, but just negative and so many, they eat up so much of your time and energy in your thought process. And so I was very disciplined, and I mean, my scheduling, I scheduled all my classes in the morning, so I could get lunch, go home, maybe take a quick nap, go to practice, and then I'd do my studying afterwards. I mean, I didn't have much time for anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people all the time, playing a college sport is like having a full-time job and going to school at the same time. There's just not a lot of time for anything else if you want to be good and if you want to be successful. And Georgia Tech was a very difficult school. It wasn't like you could just cruise by and get through. I remember my first report card wasn't great. I wasn't super prepared from Enid High School in Oklahoma to Georgia Tech, but I figured it out. I put the work in. They had, fortunately there was, they had tutors that were, Georgia Tech was a great school, and you had the resources to be successful if you tapped into them, and that was kind of my approach. And
Yeah.
I was fortunate. That was the other great thing that happened. Probably the greatest thing that happened to me was I met my wife at Georgia Tech,
Oh, wow.
and we've been married for 36 years now. But she was actually an engineering major at Georgia Tech, and she studied a lot more than I did because that engineering stuff
I
is no
bet.
joke. But we dated my last couple of years at Tech, and then got married my first year in the NBA. So
Wow.
uh, she was obviously my greatest, if you want to call it greatest accomplishment at
That
Georgia
was your
Tech,
cutting down the
my
nets
wife,
moment right there.
and of course winning the ACC championship coming second.
That's not a lot of time for the varsity
No.
with that schedule. And this one comes from my wife. She was going to ask, talk about the impact of social media on today's athletes. Like, could you imagine that Georgetown game if there was social media around? Because even Kyle Guy, he mentioned when he was on here, when they lost to a number 16 seed, he was receiving death threats at 19 years old. So talk to us about how that's impacting a lot of today's athletes.
Well, I think it's impacted them probably more than people realize, because I just think it's almost impossible not to look at
Yeah.
if you have it. I mean, you go down that rabbit trail and you look to see what people are saying about the game. That's like the worst possible thing you could do. I mean, we only had to worry about getting bashed in like one newspaper or something like that. If we had a bad game, and you didn't have to go read it if you didn't want to. But yeah, I mean, every kid, every student you pass by on campus is reading what's going on, and they're looking at you. And it's really, I feel for the kids now. I mean, there just has to be, hopefully they have enough encouragement around them, positive,
Yeah.
because the negative stuff, you just gotta stay away from it as much as you can, because I mean it's going to be there.
Yeah, it's and my family, we're all big on emotional intelligence.
Right.
And we'll watch Carolina, and my wife, she's getting her degree as a psychiatrist, and she'll watch like Carolina, for example, and she'll say, I feel so bad. I can tell Pete Nance is in his head. And then you go on social media and people are just absolutely cruel. But then the next game against Virginia, he lights up Virginia, and those same people love him.
Oh yeah, of
And
course.
I hate to see it that way. And but yeah,
Yeah.
it's you you end up getting drafted in the 86 draft, which that's the Len Bias draft, right?
Yep. Yep.
You went second round, first pick overall. What a steal. First pick of the second round to Dallas. End up going to Cleveland. You were labeled too small, too slow for the NBA. Uh, I'm sure whoever wrote that is probably doing their best to delete that from the internet. But what was it like transitioning from Crimmins to Wilkins and college to pros?
Yeah, like you said, it's something I dealt with at every level. Here I was playing in the best conference in the country for 4 years. Every point guard I played against just about became an NBA player.
Mm-hmm.
I was first team All ACC over those guys for 3-4 years. But yet for some reason they were all going to be better than me in the NBA. So, I mean, I'm like, hey, okay, I know y'all are the experts, but I just knew I had confidence and I also trust, if God wanted me that to be part of my life, then he was going to make that happen. But I just always had a confidence in my abilities and that I put in. And the NBA was definitely the next step. And I mean, the guys were bigger, faster, stronger, than even, I mean, you had probably two to three pros on an ACC team, and now you're playing against the best players from every school every night.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was a backup player my first year in Cleveland. It was a blessing that I got traded to Cleveland because they were kind of rebuilding. They brought in new management, Wayne Embry, the GM. I mean, to this day, I don't think we get enough credit for that 86
Underrated.
draft. I just can't imagine there being a better draft in NBA history.
Oh, took Darty number one that year.
Brad Doherty, number
Yeah.
one, Ron Harper at 7. They
Yeah.
got me at 25. They got Johnny Newman at 30 something. And then you had Hot Rod Williams, who they had gotten the year before but couldn't play because of issues that he was going through. So you had those five guys come in one draft class. I mean, it was just I just can't imagine there being a better better draft class in NBA history, and yet you don't hear people talk about that a lot. And so, similar to my Georgia Tech experience, in all honesty, went into a franchise that had struggled for years. A lot of people, I mean, nicknames, the Cadavers, people wearing bags over their heads to the games of the year, and things like that. We didn't make the playoffs our first year, but we won like 31-50. We were like 31-51 my first year in Cleveland. And, we had guys that had come from winning programs. Like Brad came from Carolina, Georgia Tech. We were used to winning that many games in college, right? Almost. Right. And so we were like, man, we're terrible. Like 31-51. This is like awful. And yet the fans, the people in Cleveland were like, man, you guys are so good. We're like so happy you're here. I mean, it was just like, because they've been so bad for so many years. And I think people finally saw this young group of guys that were going to keep getting better and better and better. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, we went from 31 to winning 40 something the next year, and we never missed the playoffs after that. And so it was quite a great run, and had some great teams. And we, had a guy named Jordan in the Eastern Conference, unfortunately, in Chicago that we couldn't get past.
And some bad boys.
I mean, the East was the beast back then, and so we were playing the Celtics. I mean, you just go down the list.
Yeah.
And so, what a great time to play in the NBA. I just think it was the greatest era. I'm biased, but I mean, the talent. I mean, the great
your
players
career in general,
just unbelievable.
You played the highlight, in my opinion, of the ACC, and then you go in, and it's just the best era of the NBA, in my opinion, was. And you didn't just play; you excelled in it. '89, you're part of the 50-40-90 club, along with Bird, where it's 50% field goal percentage, 40% from three, and then 90 from the free throw. You were a killer at the free throw line. And then 3-point contest, 93, 94. I was telling him before we hit record, I would have little like chalk X's around my driveway. And after swiping one of my neighbor's balls, I was Mark Price into 3-point contest. Although certain shots didn't count. But then you were first team All NBA in 93. And then 87-93, these Cavs teams were so criminally underrated. It's just y'all couldn't stop running into the Bulls in the playoffs. 92, little interesting trivia note. Y'all were the team that eliminated Larry Bird, ended the Bird era with the Celtics, and then ran into Jordan and the Bulls. Very competitive 92 playoffs. And then you wound down your career with the Bullets, the Warriors, and the Magic. Was it injuries that kind of brought your career to a close?
I had a lot of injuries, taking a beating. There's no doubt that my side, just the physicality, the era that I played in, the banging and the beating took its toll on me physically over my career. But I'm extremely proud of what I was able to accomplish while I was in the NBA, beyond all my wildest dreams. I mean, God definitely had a bigger plan than me. When I first showed up, I remember a guy for the Cavs saying, if you play your cards right, you could be a really good 3-point shooting specialist in this league. And, I kind of looked at him like, well,
it's like challenge accepted everywhere.
Yeah. But I think I'm going to be a little bit better than that. But, it was, that was just kind of the way it was. But, God had bigger and better plans for me. And it was all for his glory. I mean, I look back on it now and I'm like, man, I can't even believe I was playing against those guys and doing as well as I was. It was, like you said, 93 was just a crazy, crazy year. I mean, I was first team All NBA. Like, who does that? Like, that's just like
splitting a double team and those passes.
It's like crazy. I mean, but yeah, it was quite a ride, and I'm blessed to have had the career I did. I was probably cut short a little bit due to injuries, but I don't regret any of my time there and what I was able to accomplish.
Didn't you play with your brother for the Bullets?
I did. We were on the same team. We didn't
How
get to
cool was
play a
that?
lot. We didn't get to play a lot together that year because I was injured most of that season. But that actually opened up the opportunity for him. I mean, if they brought me in, I was going to be the starter. He was going to back me up, and then I got injured, so it really opened up and kind of helped his career because he signed a good contract with Houston after that.
Yeah,
But yeah, he was 5 years younger than me growing up, and that's a pretty big difference when you're young. While I
right.
was in high school, he was just a middle schooler and all that, and so our family's always been close, but we probably weren't super close just because of the age difference. I mean,
Right.
and so that year of kind of getting to come together as adults and playing together for the Bullets that year, that was one of the best times of my life. Just getting to hang out with my brother every
Love
day,
that.
and getting to spend time together, and kind of getting to reconnect. And we've been so close ever since. We got to do that.
That's really cool. And what about the legend behind your NBA Jam status?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where that came from. It's
Some
crazy.
programmer was a huge Mark Price fan.
Yeah, like I don't know. I never missed in that game. I don't think hardly. It was just crazy.
Funny story. My daughter and I went to we were at a comic store. This was about a month ago, and there was NBA Jam arcade game set up, and she picked Cleveland. I
Yeah.
picked Phoenix, and I was like, Kevin Johnson, I got this. And it was no lie, it brought me back to my childhood. It was Mark Price for three. He's on fire, and you scorched me on NBA Jam. Um, and she was hitting full court shots and everything with you. So yeah, and when I mentioned on social media that I was going to talk to you, NBA Jam was one of the most referenced things. So you are this legend in the Super Nintendo world.
That's funny. That's funny.
How about the Dream Team 2? How cool was that?
Yeah, it was really cool. I think just following Dream Team One, I don't think our team ever probably got as much respect or that we probably should have. But I mean, you go down the talent on that team. Dream Team Two was Shaq and Lonzo Mourning, Derek Coleman. I mean, that front line, Sean Kemp, and then the guards. I mean, Matt. I mean, yeah, Kevin Johnson, myself, Tim Hardaway, Isaiah Thomas, Reggie Miller, Joe Dumars.
The most
I mean, it
underrated
was
point guards ever.
we were so good, and I mean, really, the games were over by halftime. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
probably the most fun part of that was training camp when we just got to scrimmage against each other,
Oh, I bet.
and stuff. It was just incredible.
And so one thing that's been part of your journey, in life after basketball, talk about the importance of, well, in the military, as I mentioned, we have social, emotional, physical, and spiritual domains. Talk about how important faith's been along your journey.
Well, I mean, faith is just my faith in the Lord is. I became a believer when I was in high school,
Hmm.
and I'd grown up in the church, and I, went to a Baptist church. My, parents were very, very strong believers, and every time the church doors were open, we were there. And so I loved God. I knew all about Jesus, but it wasn't until my junior year that I kind of realized that, this I got to make this like personal. I got to
Mm-hmm.
make this personal for me. That's what faith in Christ is. It's a personal relationship. I think sometimes when kids grow up in a Christian home, I call it this like umbrella theory, right? Where kind of what the family believes, we're all under that. And it kind of like it falls on all, kind of counts for me somehow.
Oh
And
yeah.
the more I read scripture, as I got more serious about it in high school, I began to really see that, it didn't really matter what my dad believed or, what my family believed or what my friends believe. Ultimately, for me, it matters whether or not I accept Christ as my personal savior. And so that's when I did that after my junior year in high school. And it really changed everything for me, even from a basketball standpoint, because growing up, I was, always small. I was always under, trying to overachieve. And, I had this drive of, in a way, trying to kind of prove people wrong, I'm better than you think, and kind of had this attitude a little bit about it. And, when I became a believer, I began to realize that, basketball, when I played, it was not just about me anymore. It was more about honoring and representing the Lord, and and it was about Him. It was much bigger than me, and so it really changed my focus. And one of the verses, when we talk about it earlier, whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, I wasn't going out like trying to prove people wrong anymore. That chip got kind of taken, but it was like I was just out playing for His glory, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Chariots of Fire.
I have.
It's one of my favorite movies. And matter of fact, on my visit to Georgia Tech, a guy took me to see that. I still say that's one of the reasons I went to Georgia Tech. But
Oh, wow.
the story of Eric Little, the great runner who was a strong believer, and he was going to be a missionary to China, and yet he was this runner, and he was like super fast, and he was running these races all the time, and he got asked to be, represent England in the Olympics, and his sister was starting to get like a little upset with him, and they have this conversation, and she's like, God's called you to be a missionary, and he's like, I know God's calling on my life, but He's also made me fast, and like when I run, I feel His pleasure, and that just had a real impact on my life, because I was like, man, that just really hits it. I mean, God's created me for His purpose, but right now He's given me this like ability where I can play basketball, and I'm good at it, and when I can play, I feel His pleasure, and like I can honor Him and use Him, and so that had a huge impact on my life and how I approached my faith, and in a world of athletics, because you get the question a lot from people, how can you, it's a physical, it's a sport, and how can you be a believer in that environment? And I just share those things because I was just like, it's God gave me this gift, and I just go out to honor Him, and I might have to take an elbow or whatever every now and then, and I'm sure at times I didn't respond always the way I should have, but to try to honor Him in whatever I do when I'm out there, and while I have this platform, because you're not going to have that platform forever, but to use it and allow God to use that to share His love with other people.
Yeah, that's awesome how you worded that. And I mean, the platform's been working for you for 40 years. People are still talking about you to this day, and including you've got camps that you're doing with youth. And then talk to us about that, and then also the Mark Price for Three podcast with Aaron.
Yeah, it was the podcast was an interesting thing, because I didn't know Aaron before, and somehow through a friend contacted me and kind of asked me to be on his podcast. And so I don't do a lot of those. I try to be careful, that
Appreciate you trusting us.
Yeah, no doubt. But but for some reason, there was something about Aaron that we kind of hit it off when we talked. And so, it was quickly we developed this relationship. And so just one day, Aaron calls me up and he just says, God's laid this on my heart. I think you should do a podcast, and I'll kind of help you with it and do all the kind of set it up. And I was just kind of like, well, I'll have to think about it. At first it was just kind of like, I just knew nothing about podcasting or that. But it's been great. We actually recorded our 20th episode this morning. And I mean, it's just a God thing once again, but it's been great because we just get to talk we just talk hoops and get to talk faith, and it's like being in the locker room just chatting, and every once in a while I get a guest on that kind of fits what we're looking to do for that time. And I mean, I've gotten really good response from it so far. I mean, I still don't know how many people listen to it or whatever, Um, Podcasting is a different world. I mean, it's like, people don't necessarily listen to it on the day it's released. They might listen to it 5 or 6 days later or
Months
whatever.
later.
And yeah. And so, but I really, really enjoyed it. It's been kind of surprisingly something that I've gotten excited about, every now going into each podcast.
Yeah, y'all have had some great. Craig Elo was on there,
Yeah.
and I mean, Aaron's a Cleveland Cavs guy anyway,
Oh
so
yeah. Yeah.
he's awesome. Folks, we'll have in the episode description the link for you to check out the podcast and talk about your camps that you're doing with the youth.
Yeah, I started last year. I've had people in Cleveland, for years have wanted me to do camps up there. And I just, whether with my coaching and the other things I've been doing over the years, I just wasn't able to do that. And I had a friend of mine from Avon Lake, Ohio, and he goes, "Man, we really want you to come up here and do a camp." And finally had some time where I was able to do that. And I said, "Well, I said, you set it up, get it organized, man, and I'll show up." And I mean, he did. They set it up, and he did it. And I mean, it had like 100 kids, like from Avon Lake, show up, and people started getting word of it. And they had such a good experience because my dad ran camps for years. Our family ran camps for years, and we take a different approach to our camps than a lot of people do. A lot of people, it's kind of a babysitting. The people drop off and
Yep.
whatever, but we really want to teach kids about the game of basketball. And so it's a pretty intense, like 3 day kind of full day camp of skills and stuff. And we let them actually play games kind of the last hour of the day, but that's not the focus. Like, our focus is, I'm literally giving these kids tools, teaching them things that I was doing when I was their age.
Yeah.
that allowed me to be successful as a basketball player. And it's kind of blown up like really quickly. Like, people got word of it that we did it there. And Medina calls me last year right up. And we literally had like a 2 week window. Like, who sets a camp up in 2 weeks, right? I mean, you have to have time to, people to sign up and this and that. And I said, well, I mean, can you really get enough kids there? I mean, it's like 2 weeks. And they're like, yeah. So we had like something like, 60, 70 kids and like show up at Medina. And so it's just snowballed to where there's been 3 other. And so we got 5 this summer.
Yeah.
So 5 camps this year. I mean, it'll probably grow more than that by next year, but it's been really successful. Obviously, Ohio's a really unique fit for me because of my career there in Cleveland. I'm still really, I mean, a lot of, if the kids don't know who I am, their parents do. And,
Oh yeah.
And so it's like, they want to send them to my camp. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is awesome as well. And I mean, you're doing so many amazing things off the court since your basketball journey has ended. The end of the day, what do you want your legacy to be when you're in record books, whether it's Georgia Tech or Cleveland? People mention you 50 years from now. What do you want them to say about you?
Well, that's a really good question. I think first of all, I hope I'm remembered as a man of faith that was sincere and honest about trusting the Lord and following Him and doing His best. I mean, we're all human beings. We all make mistakes over our lifetime, but I just want to be remembered as a guy that guy's faith was real, and because it is, and that I cared about other people, and that I love the game of basketball, and I gave every single thing I had to that. I didn't, that's the one thing I was telling kids: don't walk away with like regrets. I mean, you may not win your last game, you may not, whatever it is, but when you walk away, man, can you walk away and say, you know what, I gave every single ounce of what I had to it, and that's how I felt about my career. And I may not have had as much talent as some, but God gave me enough, and I squeezed every ounce of it out. And so I'm proud of what I was able to do with that part of my career.
Yeah, amazing career, amazing person, amazing message that you're spreading. Like you said, with that platform, what final comments do you have for our listeners?
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity to come on and share my life story a little bit. And I know there's a lot of people out there that came and supported me over the years. just want you to know how much that means to me. I don't take that lightly. The fans were I always had a special relationship with all the fans and wherever I played, just because I think a lot of people could relate to me. Because I look a lot like a lot of them. There's a lot more 5'11", 6-foot guys out there than 6'8", 6'9" guys. And so I think I was able to bring a lot of hope to a lot of kids over the years that, hey, if Mark can do it, I can do it. And I hope that's the case. I hope I encouraged you that way, because I know you guys always encouraged me over the years and supported me, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, you definitely encouraged me. It wasn't just NBA Jam. Do you remember starting lineup figures?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I had Mark Price starting lineup figures.
Some of those were so bad, man. I mean, they were.
They had one where you were playing defense.
Yeah,
you
well,
didn't even have
what's
a
up with
basketball.
that?
You didn't even have a basketball on you. So
exactly.
But no, it was I mean, you've been a huge part of my childhood. I still huge fan of the game. Golden era of the NBA and college basketball. It's really cool for me to see. My daughter's a massive college basketball fan, and to see her looking up old clips from, the 85, 86. She won't sit through a whole game back then because
Right.
she's conditioned to it like it is now, but the highlights and stuff, it's incredible. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for taking time to be a guest here on The Shadows. And folks, that'll conclude an amazing season 3 of the Rebound series here on The Shadows podcast.